During my birthday dinner, my parents handed me a $10 gift card. Moments later, they presented my brother with plane tickets to Europe, declaring he'd earned a break. I simply thanked them politely, then rose and announced, "By the way, I'm taking a sabbatical too, because I just sold my startup for $3.2 million. My brother dropped his fork, and my parents went visibly pale. It was my 30th birthday, and my mother slid a $10 Chili's gift card across the dinner table. No envelope, no ribbon, just the rigid plastic rectangle, as if it were a forgotten receipt. She didn't meet my gaze, pushing it forward while asking me to pass the butter. I said, "Thank you," as I always do. I've been conditioned like a Labrador, trained to wag my tail even when I'm being mistreated. Exactly 5 minutes later, she delved into her purse again, this time beaming with theatrical glee. She produced a small floral-trimmed envelope and handed it to my brother, Marcus, with both hands, as though it were a sacred offering. "For you, sweetheart," she cooed, as if the universe were finally bestowing Marcus with his just desserts. Marcus peeled it open slowly, savoring the moment like a child on Christmas morning. Inside were 2 business-class plane tickets to Europe, Barcelona, and Rome, complete with hotel reservations and a detailed itinerary. My parents had clearly labored over 4 hours. "You've earned a break," my father told him, "after everything you've been through." In that instant, something inside me I can't name, it shifted. It didn't break. Snapping would imply I caused a scene, cried, screamed, slammed silverware. No, what I felt was colder, quieter. It was like a steel door clanged shut deep within me, sealing off any part of myself that still cared. I smiled politely, cut a piece of ham, and chewed. In that same hushed, polite voice, I declared, "By the way, I'm taking a sabbatical too." They all froze, mid-bite. "Because I just sold my startup," I continued, "for $3,200,000. Marcus's fork clattered against his plate. My parents' faces, drained of color, and for the first time in my life, the room was mine. But let's rewind. This wasn't my first $10 gift. Frankly, it wasn't even the cheapest. On my 20th birthday, I got a clearance mug from Kohl's with a chipped handle. For my 25th, my mother texted, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Let's do dinner soon," then ghosted me for 6 weeks. Meanwhile, Marcus received a surprise brunch party, custom cupcakes, and a sleek silver watch. "He's going through a lot," my parents would explain. "He needs the support right now." Apparently, Marcus has been going through a lot for the past 30 years. Every failed relationship, every bounced rent check, every time he quit a job because he didn't feel seen. My parents treated these as national emergencies. Marcus was allowed to spiral, while I was told to be patient, understanding, to let him have his moment. I used to question my sanity, wonder if I was overly sensitive. I'd convince myself it wasn't favoritism, just different needs, a mantra I'd clung to since I was old enough to realize Marcus's tears outweighed my accomplishments. I earned straight A's. "Well, of course you did. Marcus passed a class. Let's take him out to celebrate." I worked 2 jobs in college and never asked for help. Marcus racked up credit card debt studying astrology in Bali and got a bailout. And a hug. I learned to stop expecting applause. I learned to clap for myself. The worst part, I wasn't truly jealous of him. I didn't want his chaos. I simply wanted my parents to see me, to look at me the way they looked at Marcus when he showed up late to dinner, spouting some half-baked idea about discovering his true path in sound therapy. I wanted them to ask about my job without looking confused. I wanted them to genuinely ask how I was doing, not if I'd met someone yet or if I was still doing that computer stuff. When I started my tech company, I didn't tell anyone, not out of secrecy, but because I knew their reaction. I knew my parents would call it risky, ask why I couldn't just get a normal job like my cousin in accounting. So I built it in silence nights, weekends, lunch breaks. I took client calls in my car and sketched wireframes on old notebooks. I began it as a side project while at a marketing firm, failed 3 times with different concepts before one finally took off. It took 7 years to turn it into something real. But when it finally happened, I didn't shout it from the rooftops. I just kept going, because no one was watching anyway. That night, at the dinner table, everything clicked into place. The $10 gift card wasn't just thoughtless. It was a summation, a final statement. My parents saw me as low maintenance, not in an admirable way, but in a way that meant I didn't need consideration. I was the one who didn't ask for much, so they consistently gave me less, year after year. And as Marcus chuckled over European cities he couldn't pronounce, and my parents beamed as if they'd saved a soul, A painful yet liberating truth dawned on me. I would never receive from them what I had quietly yearned for my entire life. So I let the quiet do the work. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't beg to be seen. I simply waited for a lull in the conversation, took a sip of wine, and said, "Actually, I've got something I wanted to share too." All eyes turned to me. I smiled, the kind of smile you practice in the mirror for years without realizing, and that's when I spoke. For the first time, I watched the world tilt slightly in my favor, and I wasn't finished. What no one tells you about being the dependable one, the quiet achiever, the family's rock, is that eventually, people stop seeing you entirely. You don't get praised, you don't get comforted, you don't even get noticed. You simply become furniture. Sturdy, predictable, essential, but never admired. I spent most of my life in that invisible so deep it lodged in my bones. The worst part is, it wasn't always so obvious. When we were kids, Marcus and I weren't that different. He was louder. Certainly, with that reckless energy, parole smiling when I didn't want to, helping when I was exhausted, swallowing disappointment, opal mistake for charm in small doses, and chaos when constant. I was quieter, more curious, the one who liked puzzles, science kits, and writing stories I never shared. At first, it didn't feel like a competition, but by age 10, it was clear Marcus's drama held more weight than my calm. He cried when he lost a game. He got candy. I won the spelling bee. My parents didn't even come. I had to work, my mother said. Besides, I knew you'd win. That sentence stayed with me longer than any applause. It sounded like a compliment, but was a dismissal, veiled in flattery. That pattern never broke. If I succeeded, it was expected. If Marcus stumbled, it was a crisis. My parents would light candles, make tea, stroke his hair as if he were a wounded bird. They'd say, "You're so sensitive, you feel everything so deeply," then tell me I was strong in a voice that meant cold, detached, not worth fussing over. By high school, I stopped showing them my report cards. I didn't mention getting into the advanced science program or being accepted into an out-of-state college with a partial scholarship. They were too busy managing Marcus's heartbreak over a girl he dated for 3 weeks. I remember packing my dorm supplies into the back of my used Honda while Marcus sobbed on the porch about his boss not respecting his art. My parents hovered over him with tissues. They didn't even walk me to my car. I didn't cry. I didn't throw a fit. I got in the car, drove to college, and built a life for myself. I graduated early, got a job at a small marketing firm, and paid off my loans within 5 years. No one asked how I did it. Marcus, meanwhile, bounced from idea to idea like a pinball. For a while, he was a life coach, then a fashion blogger. Then he managed an open mic bar for 3 months before falling for a DJ and moving to Arizona. Each failure, my parents framed as a noble journey. "He's figuring it out," they'd say, with a proud smile, as if Marcus's machinations proved his authenticity. And me, I was just the boring child, the one who didn't need help, the one who handled things. That night at the birthday dinner, under the soft yellow glow of my parents' meticulously set dining room, all those memories pressed down on me like an unseen weight. I could hear Marcus's laughter bouncing off the walls as he recounted some rambling story about almost being cast in a reality show in LA. My parents leaned in, captivated. My father nodded enthusiastically, adding supportive comments, never questioning the lack of follow-through. He's always been that way, kind, but enabling. He observes more than he admits, but rarely challenges. I caught him glancing at me, once or twice, but he said nothing. Perhaps he didn't know what to say, or maybe he knew and simply preferred not to ignite anything. When my parents gave Marcus those Europe tickets, their words were so soft, so affectionate. I felt like I was watching a Hallmark movie. "You've earned a break," they said. "After all you've been through." They spoke with such tenderness. I wanted to scream. What exactly had Marcus been through? A breakup, a failed art installation, a retreat that didn't align with his soul's purpose. Meanwhile, I'd survived layoffs, built a company from scratch, skipped vacations for 5 straight years, and not once had anyone told me I'd earned anything. I didn't even get a thank you for fixing their Wi-Fi last month. It's a strange sensation, sitting in a room full of people and realizing no one truly sees you, not fully. They see what they want to see, the role you play in their story. Marcus's story was about struggle and redemption. Mine was about competence, no arc, no applause, just reliable, silent function. I was a tool in their narrative, not a protagonist in my own. That realization should have sparked anger, and perhaps it did, somewhere deep down. But in that moment, it just made me tired. So when I said I had something to share, It wasn't revenge, not even pettiness. It was simpler, a reclamation, a declaration. For once, I wanted the room to acknowledge me, not because I was yelling, not because I was falling apart, but because I had accomplished something real, something difficult, something they couldn't ignore. The silence after my announcement stretched taut, like a string poised to snap. Marcus blinked 3 times, as if he misheard me. My parents' lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. My father looked down at his plate and let out a small, almost inaudible sigh. I picked up my wineglass, swirled it slowly, and smiled. Again, not smugly, not vengefully, just calmly, in control. After all these years, this was the only thing I truly owned, and I wasn't giving it away, not this time. It wasn't just the silence. It was a stillness that seeped into the room like a cold mist, thick and slow, creeping across every surface until everyone at the table seemed to choke on it, yet no one dared speak. My words, so simple, so precise, had shattered whatever scripted family performance we were meant to play that night. My parents sat rigid, their jaws slightly clenched, as if holding back something that couldn't quite fit. Marcus, for once, was quiet, his fingers still hovering above his wineglass, his mouth slightly ajar in confusion or perhaps disbelief, as though the very idea of me having anything significant to say or achieve had short-circuited his entire understanding of the family hierarchy. I didn't gloat. That's the part people often misunderstand about moments like this. When you've spent your life underestimated, ignored, or quietly dismissed, finally gaining the upper hand doesn't come with fireworks or shouting. It comes with restraint, with power in your posture, with a decision not to over-explain, so I didn't. I simply sipped my wine, set my glass down gently, and let the weight of my words settle in their stunned silence. $3,200,000. That wasn't just a number, it was a message, a recalibration. It wasn't about the money, though, admittedly, the sum didn't hurt. It was about the fact that I had achieved something significant without anyone's permission, approval, or even acknowledgement. I had created something from nothing. I had poured every ounce of myself every late night, every anxious breakdown, every meal eaten over my laptop into building something real. And I had done it while they were too preoccupied fussing over Marcus's latest artistic rebirth to even notice. My mother recovered first, of course. She always did. She blinked, reached for her napkin, dabbed the corners of her mouth though she hadn't eaten in 5 minutes. San said, in a tone meant to sound casual but laced with a distinct tremor, "Why didn't you tell us?" That question, that stupid, hollow question, why didn't I tell them? Because every time I opened my mouth to share something meaningful, it was met with either indifference or skepticism. Because when I told my parents 5 years ago that I wanted to start my own company, they laughed and said, "Are you sure that's a good idea? Tech is so unstable. Wouldn't it be better to just find a secure job?" Because they never asked about my business beyond superficial questions they barely understood. Because they had no curiosity about my life unless it could be unfavorably compared to Marcus's. I looked at them and smiled again, not with kindness, not with cruelty, but with the measured calm of someone who knows they finally have the upper hand. Would it have mattered? I asked, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. Would you have even believed me? Marcus finally spoke, his voice brittle, defensive, sharp, reminding me of every teenage fight when he'd twist my words, and then play victim the moment I raised my voice. I mean, $3 million. That's a lot. How did you even, just wake up and decide to be rich? I could have taken the bait. I could have listed every unpaid invoice I chased, every pitch I bombed before getting it right, every moment of self-doubt I stifled with another hour of work. I could have explained the algorithms I built, the partnerships I negotiated, the time I poured into building something scalable, but I didn't, because he wouldn't understand. And more importantly, he didn't want to understand. He wanted to poke holes to reduce it to luck or a fleeting trend, because acknowledging my competence would unbalance the fragile pedestal he'd been perched on his whole life. I didn't wake up rich, I said evenly. I woke up every day for 7 years and worked while no one was looking. My father coughed lightly, reaching for his water, a faint signal of support, or perhaps discomfort. It was always hard to tell with him. He wasn't a bad man, just afraid of confrontation. He preferred peace, even if it was fake. I caught his eyes for a second. There was something there, respect maybe, or regret. I didn't linger on it. My mother tried again, leaning into the diplomatic tone she used to smooth things over. "Well, of course, we're proud of you," she said, but the words fell flat, as if she were reading from an unprepared script. "That's a huge accomplishment. Sweetheart, we had no idea." I wasn't interested in her performance, not anymore, so I nodded politely, picked up my fork, and resumed eating, as if I hadn't just dropped a truth bomb into the middle of their carefully curated dinner party. I let them squirm in their discomfort, let them replay every moment they had dismissed me, as if it had only just dawned on them that I might have been worth paying attention to all along. Marcus sat stiffly, arms crossed, staring at the tablecloth, as if it had betrayed him. The Europe tickets still lay beside his plate, a stark reminder of the narrative that had suddenly fractured. He had spent years as the main character, the emotional centerpiece, the one whose life was always more interesting, more urgent, more deserving of attention. And now, in a single sentence, I had rewritten the script. I watched him stew in it, feeling nothing, not joy, not guilt, just clarity. This was the consequence of silence. This was what happened when you let others write your story, then dared to take the pen back. The dinner limped on, filled with forced conversation and brittle laughter, but it didn't matter. The shift had already occurred. I had spoken my piece. I had claimed my space. And I wasn't finished yet. By the time dessert arrived, an overbaked lemon cake my mother insisted was from scratch. Just like Grandma used to make, the tension in the room had thickened, congealing into something unspoken, hanging heavily between us. No one made eye contact anymore. The usual familiar rhythm, that strange dance of subtle jabs and exaggerated praise that had been our dysfunctional norm for as long as I could remember, had disintegrated under the weight of a single truth I had finally spoken aloud. And still, not one of them asked the most obvious question: what now? I watched my brother pick at the edge of his plate, his once animated demeanor deflated into quiet resentment. His eyes never quite met mine, but I could see the thoughts racing behind them. He was calculating how he'd missed this, how the sibling he'd dismissed as boring and risk-averse had pulled off something that, by all accounts, should have belonged to him. Marcus had always presented himself as the visionary, the free spirit, the one with big energy and a creative soul, as my parents often called it. He believed, deep down, and likely unchallenged, that the universe owed him a breakthrough, that one day someone would recognize his light and pour resources into his personal brand of chaos. So, for him, my quiet, consistent grind wasn't just uninteresting, it was invisible. And the fact that it had yielded something as tangible and undeniable as millions of dollars wasn't merely surprising. It was a betrayal of the narrative he'd embraced for decades. My parents, ever the image curators, attempted once more to regain control. My mother set her fork down with deliberate care, folded her napkin into a tiny, trembling square, and leaned across the table, as if physical proximity could bridge the emotional chasm that had opened. "Lauren, I just want to say," she began, her voice delicate, like offering condolences at a funeral, "that we're truly, genuinely proud of you. I think it's just taken us all by surprise." I studied her face, trying to detect sincerity beneath the brittle civility, but I found only that familiar, reflexive damage control she had perfected over years of managing Marcus's blow-ups and deflecting accountability with vague reassurances. There was no actual curiosity in her eyes, no urge to know what I had done or how, only a desperate scramble to reshape the situation into something less threatening. Because in their world, emotional equilibrium was everything, even if it meant ignoring the truth. "So, what are you going to do now?" she asked cautiously, her tone too even to rehearsed. That was the moment I knew she wasn't asking out of interest. She was asking to regain control. If she could frame my success as a temporary moment, something she could neatly file into a category like Lauren's lucky break or that one time Lauren surprised us all, then she wouldn't have to confront what it truly meant. That for years, they had favored volatility over stability, performance over substance, fantasy over fact. That they had built an entire familial structure around the belief that Marcus needed more, deserved more, because he was fragile and special and full of potential that just needed nurturing, and that I, being the capable one, would quietly take care of myself in the corner. I looked at her for a long moment before answering, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to remember this. Her face, the faint panic beneath the smile, Marcus's narrowed eyes, my father's awkward stillness, the entire illusion slowly crumbling around us. I wanted to etch this into my memory, not for vengeance, but for clarity. "I think I'm going to disappear for a while," I said finally, keeping my voice calm and measured. "Take some time, rest, see the world, like Marcus is doing, except this time, I won't need anyone to book the tickets for me." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't shocked, it was closer to stunned acceptance, like a courtroom after the verdict. Marcus flinched slightly, his jaw tightening, and my parents looked as if they had swallowed something sour. My father, to his credit, didn't try to cover it with a joke. He just looked at me, truly looked, and for a fleeting second, I thought, he might say something that mattered, but he didn't. He nodded once, slowly, and looked down at his plate. There was no apology, no grand gesture, no reckoning, just that quiet, desperate energy of people trying to tape together a broken mirror without acknowledging the shards. Marcus spoke first. "Well, good for you," he muttered, pushing his chair back. "Must be nice to take a break just because you feel like it." It was petty and transparent, and I almost laughed, because for years, that was the role he had played, taking breaks, not because he truly needed them, but because life was always too overwhelming for someone who never followed through. I had never resented his breaks. I had resented that no one questioned them, that my parents treated his exhaustion like an emergency and mine like a sign I was doing something wrong. I could have responded with something equally sharp, could have reminded him that I had earned this rest through years of effort no one acknowledged, but I didn't. Instead, I stood up, placed my napkin gently beside my plate, and said, "Yeah, it is nice." No yelling, no chaos, just truth delivered simply, with the weight of everything I had carried and the clarity of someone who had finally decided to stop asking for recognition and just take what she had earned. I didn't stay for coffee. I didn't wait for anyone to hug me or ask me to stay. I walked out with my head high and my heart calm, knowing that I had just burned down the lie that had kept me small for too long. I didn't need them to clap, I didn't need their approval. I had my freedom, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. There's a strange clarity that follows a rupture like the one at my birthday dinner, a sense that the world hasn't so much changed as it has finally been stripped of all its embellishments and excuses, leaving only the bare truth. As I stepped into the cool evening air, the sky streaked with pale gray and lavender as the sun began to set, I didn't feel triumphant in the way some might imagine. No swelling victory music played in my head, no overwhelming feeling of having won. Instead, what I felt was something quieter, heavier, and more permanent, the stillness that follows a long, exhausting war you never actually signed up to fight, but ended up winning simply by refusing to surrender. I sat in my car for a while before starting the engine, my hands resting motionless on the steering wheel, as the last fragments of conversation echoed in my ears. My parents' brittle reassurances, Marcus's sharp, envious comment disguised as a passive jab, my father's quiet nothingness, which somehow hurt the most because it suggested he might have seen everything but chosen, again and again, to stay out of it. I don't know what I had expected when I told them about the sale of my startup. Perhaps not celebration, but at least a pause, a recognition, a simple moment of genuine attention directed at me without filters or reluctance. But what I received instead was a mixture of disbelief, defensiveness, and an almost immediate attempt to minimize it or place it into some neat little box where it couldn't threaten the roles we had all been playing for so long. As I drove away, the quiet hum of the tires against the pavement was the only sound that felt honest. I didn't have a destination in mind, at least not that night. I wasn't ready to go home yet. I needed distance, a buffer zone of silence and space to remind myself that I was no longer bound by that house or its dynamics. I had spent so many years contorting myself to fit into the space they had left for me, to meet their expectations, to play the version of Lauren they were most comfortable with, but that version had always been an edited draft, stripped of ambition, devoid of desire, built to serve other people's egos rather than exist on its own terms. For a long time, I had believed that if I just kept my head down, worked hard, and proved myself, they would eventually come around. I thought there was a finish line somewhere, a moment when they would say, "We see you now, we're proud of you." We were wrong. But the truth I finally faced that night was that some people don't change not because they can't, but because they don't feel they need to. My parents had spent decades believing they were fair, generous, and loving, even as they repeatedly prioritized Marcus's needs, crises, and emotions over mine. Marcus had built his identity around being the one who mattered most, who needed the most, and therefore deserved the most. And that story didn't leave room for someone like me to be celebrated, because the moment I was seen, it cast him in a dimmer light. I stopped at a lookout point on the edge of town, a place I hadn't visited since high school, when I used to drive there just to think, to escape the noise at home, to imagine a life that felt bigger and freer than the one I was being handed. I parked, stepped out, and leaned on the rail overlooking the valley below. The city stretched out like a sleeping animal, lights flickering on one by one, a patchwork of lives unfolding in their own tangled ways. And for the first time in years, I felt something unburdened rise up in me, not joy exactly, and not relief, but a release, as though I had finally stopped holding my breath. I pulled out my phone and opened the airline app. I didn't know where I would go yet. Europe maybe, or Iceland, or somewhere farther. Somewhere that didn't carry the weight of my family's history. I scrolled through flights without urgency, letting the possibilities unfold like pages in a book I hadn't yet decided how to read. I wasn't running away, and I wasn't chasing anything either. I was simply choosing myself. Maybe for the first time, I had spent so long living in reaction to others, trying to avoid conflict, to earn approval, to not be a burden, that I had forgotten what it felt like to move through the world on my own terms. There was a part of me that wondered if my parents would call the next day, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, maybe to pretend the night hadn't happened at all. But deep down, I knew better. They wouldn't call, or if they did, it would be brief, evasive, performative. Marcus might send a sarcastic text or perhaps a passive-aggressive social media post about people flexing their money like it proves anything. My father might say nothing at all. That was the nature of our family, not explosive, not openly cruel, but slow-burning in its neglect, precise in its emotional hierarchy, always maintaining just enough politeness to avoid reckoning with the truth. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not the favoritism itself, but the fact that it was always denied, always wrapped in soft language and plausible deniability, leaving me to question whether I was imagining things. But now, after what I had said, after what I had finally allowed myself to feel and voice and act upon, there was no going back into that fog of polite silence. I knew that some people watching from the outside would hear the story and think I had delivered the perfect revenge, that I had waited for the right moment, dropped the news like a grenade, and walked away victorious. But that's not how it felt. Revenge implies malice. What I did was something different. It was reclamation. It was refusing to shrink. It was choosing quietly and without apology to live my life without waiting for permission. As the wind picked up slightly and the sky deepened into twilight, I stood there and realized that the moment I left that dinner table, I hadn't just left a meal or an awkward family gathering. I had left an entire structure behind, a house of mirrors built to make me doubt my worth, to reflect back only the parts of me that were useful, compliant, manageable. And now, with nothing but sky and road ahead of me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough.